Have you ever wondered what the statues on Easter Island really mean? I know that I did, ever since they appeared in a computer game that I played as a child. But it was this curiosity that led me to Easter Island for the first time back in 1996, aged just 19. And a few years later, I went back to do the studies for my linguistics, and what was supposed to be a one-year stay turned into over 20 years living on Easter Island. Now, spending so long on such a small, remote island was, of course, a fascinating experience. But it also taught me an important lesson, and one that I'd like to share with you this evening. Easter Island is one of the most remote inhabited islands anywhere in the world. It lies almost 4,000 kilometers off the west coast of South America. Today, it's become world famous for its mysterious culture, and in particular, the hundreds of stone statues that lie scattered around the island. Who carved them? Why did they carve them? And why, centuries later, were they all thrown over and destroyed? Almost as famous as the narrative about Easter Island and the statues is the popular myth about what took place there. And many of you perhaps have even heard it yourselves. That of a mysterious land whose now vanished inhabitants carved hundreds of these enormous statues, and they did so at the same time as cutting down the trees on the island, to the extent that they basically collapsed their own society, and it led to their own extinction. This version of events has become so popular today that people even use Easter Island as a metaphor for planet Earth. And they equate what happened in the past on Easter Island to what might be happening today to humanity on our particular island, the planet Earth. And so it was with this story that I went to Easter Island all those years ago. Look at that young, innocent man, completely oblivious to the ways of the world and completely unaware that my life was about to change forever with that visit. Because I completed my studies, and at the end of them, I decided that I was going to stay and live on Easter Island because of the sense of detachment and the sheer enjoyment that I got from living amongst such a unique culture. And so over the course of the next 20 years, I did everything that I could to integrate myself into that small community. I learned the local language. I studied the oral history of the Rapa Nui, the indigenous islanders, the indigenous inhabitants of Easter Island. And I also, where possible, participated in cultural events that took place on the island, and also sporting events as well. And you might need to look slightly closer here, but you will see that that's me on the left-hand side, very much in last place in this particular race. No, I didn't win the race, and no, I'm not considering a change of career anytime soon. But it was by living there, it was by spending time on the island, it was by studying its history in much greater depth that I came to appreciate that almost everything that I thought I knew about Easter Island was completely wrong. And that instead of being this warning sign for humanity and for our environment, what actually emerged instead was a story of cautious optimism. And so this is what we believe actually took place on Easter Island. About 1,000 years ago, a group of hardy Polynesians sailed across thousands of kilometers of uncharted ocean until they discovered and settled on Easter Island. They brought with them plants and animals, but they also introduced their cultural and religious beliefs, and that included the carving of small stone statues. The islanders believed that these idols offered a direct access to the gods, and so for this reason, they erected them on numerous ceremonial platforms all around the island. As the expertise of the carvers improved, the size of the statues increased. And that's why today you can find examples of statues that measure over 20 meters in height, taller probably than this beautiful building that we're inside today, and weigh more than 100 tons. And so this is the point, that on Easter Sunday 1722, when the first outsiders chanced upon Easter Island, it was a party of Dutch explorers, they couldn't believe it as they came face to face with these colossal statues in front of them, mystified by what they were seeing, but equally mystified by the island that they discovered. Because by this point, Easter Island was barren. It had been stripped bare of all of its significant resources, including the trees, and the population there was but a minimal one. And so these outsiders, they couldn't imagine how on earth had these islanders and their ancestors been able to carve and transport hundreds of enormous statues all around their island. They started to question everything that they were seeing, and this is where these erroneous facts that you and possibly I knew about Easter Island began to take seed. The Dutch, you can imagine, as they walked around the island, seeing these statues, asking themselves, how could it be that these people in front of them had carved these? Was it not some completely different race of people, now disappeared? Or could it be that Easter Island was some relic from the sunken city of Atlantis? Or how about if the statues had been carved by extraterrestrials? And yet this was a highly developed race of people. Their population had reached possibly as high as 12,000 at one point. They developed their own form of written language, a language that remains undeciphered to this day, and yet it's the only form of written language found anywhere in Polynesia. So if you're looking for some extra homework at the end of this conference, try translating the Rongo Rongo script. And yet, despite all of these advances, how could it be that such a developed people failed to plan for the future and failed to sustain all of their basic resources, such as trees? And this is really where the main crux of the idea about Easter Island lies. Because we know that they did plan for the future. They made seismic changes that actually pulled Easter Island back from the brink. And so instead of disappearing, the island leaders instigated a series of fundamental changes that saved the island and its inhabitants. They changed the agricultural practices. They added rocks to the soil in order to increase the humidity. They built protective walls around the plants in order to spare them on this now windswept, treeless island. But most significantly of all, they stopped the carving of the statues. And that's why the most iconic photographs today from Easter Island are these abandoned heads. Each one discarded, left to gather dust from the very moment that those leaders decided to stop the carving. And so it was by these dramatic and drastic actions that they saved the population of the island. They never disappeared and they never became extinct. And if you visit the island today, you'll find a healthy population of almost 10,000 people living on an actively reforested island and some of the stone statues have even been restored to their former glory. All of which is wonderful news for the island, but it's also an optimistic message for us and our own futures. So why do I tell you this very brief history of the statues of Easter Island? In part, it's because I, like many other people, was completely wrong about everything that I thought happened there. But it also made me question, if I'd been so wrong about this one particular story, how many other stories had I also got wrong based on my believing the most available information and a lack of critical thinking or deep curiosity on my part? And this is the point. We live at a time when we are inundated constantly with new information. And we have but the shortest of times to form an opinion on each one before we move on to the next thing. We fail to question very often this information. And if we do question it, we go to our most available sources: Google, Wikipedia, or heaven help us, a video on TikTok. But the point is that by not questioning this information, we're leading ourselves down this same path of following the general herd and believing whatever is out there. Case in point, the statues and the heads of Easter Island. If it hadn't been for the curiosity of archaeologists some 100 years ago, we might still believe today that these most iconic statues from Easter Island are nothing more than enormous heads. But by digging deeper, literally in this case, they revealed that each one was in fact a complete statue all the way down to its abdomen. And this is the point that I really want to leave you with today. That beneath the surface, there is so much more to discover about absolutely everything. And by digging deeper, we enrich our own lives and those of those around us. You become an expert. You become a force for good and for truth in our current environment of conspiracy theories, AI, and fake news. You don't need to spend 20 years living on Easter Island to understand what happened there all those centuries ago. You need curiosity, and you need a selection of good books. But we can't often predict where our interest and curiosity will lead us. In my case, it was to a remote island in the South Pacific. In your case, it will be somewhere or something completely different. So where will you go and dig a little deeper? And what unexpected journey might you end up taking as a result? Thank you.